Why would anyone confess to a crime they didn't commit? Back in 1515, the mere threat of the Iron Maiden was enough to make hundreds confess to anything just to avoid its embrace. But did torture truly work? Or did it simply create more victims? Today we will uncover 20 medieval torture methods and discover if the stories are even worse than you've ever imagined. Let's begin with number 20. Forget quick torture. The rack was a slow-motion demolition of the human body. You were strapped down, your wrists and ankles tied to opposite ends of a giant wooden frame. The executioner would start cranking. Not fast, but inch by screaming inch. Ligaments would snap like wet rope. Shoulders popped out of their sockets. Hips tore open. Ribs strained until they fractured. The sound wasn't just bones breaking. It was the sound of you unraveling. Blood loss was minimal. The pain was biblical. The real terror was that they could stop at any time and then start again. Confess, deny. It didn't matter. You would talk, or you would keep stretching until your skin split and you were taller by half a foot. Guy Fawkes himself was racked in 1606. Afterward, he was so mangled his signature was a shaky scribble. And the worst part, the rack didn't always kill you immediately, meaning you might just wake up in the middle of round 2. This wasn't just a collar, it was a medieval chokehold from hell. The collar of spikes was a heavy iron ring, lined with inward-facing spikes, each an inch or two long, positioned to dig into the throat, jawline and base of the skull. Once locked on, every movement, even breathing, drove the spikes deeper. Victims couldn't lie down without puncturing their neck. Sleep was impossible. After a few days, infections festered in the wounds. The constant blood loss left them weak, and their mind broke long before their body did. Some records from 15th century Germany describe prisoners wearing these for weeks. Their only reprieve was the brief removal for interrogation, where the real pain began. Forget being stretched. This nightmare folded you in half until your body wanted to snap. The scavenger's daughter, invented in 16th century England under Henry VIII, was an iron frame shaped like an A. Victims were forced into a crouch, knees to chest, head bent forward, arms clamped tight. Then the frame was locked. This crushing compression squeezed the lungs, making even shallow breathing an agony. It forced blood to surge into the head until eyes bulged and nosebleeds streamed. Chroniclers mention noble prisoners in the Tower of London, collapsing into unconsciousness after mere minutes. It was the twisted opposite of the rack not pulling you apart, but compacting you into a ball of suffering. Burning at the stake. It wasn't just flames. It was theater, fear, and slow execution, all in one. Burning at the stake was used across medieval Europe for heresy, witchcraft, and treason. Public squares packed with thousands came to watch. The victim was chained to a post, often with green wood stacked around them so the fire burned slower, prolonging the agony. In England's Marian persecutions, from 1555 to 1558, over 280 Protestants were burned, some taking more than 30 minutes to die. The stench was unforgettable. For rulers, it was more than punishment. It was propaganda, a warning carved in fire, against anyone daring to defy the crown or the church. Says pressing, peine forte et dure. In medieval England and France, peine forte et dure crushed not only bodies but wills. It was a grim loophole used on accused criminals who refused to plead. No plea meant no conviction, so their property stayed with the family. The victim lay naked on the ground, a board placed across their chest. Weights, first stones, then heavier iron slabs, were added slowly. The pressure made ribs snap like twigs and lungs collapse. In 1692, during the Salem witch trials, Giles Corey was pressed for 2 days. His last recorded words, "More weight." Pressing was torture disguised as legal process, a calculated mix of pain and psychological warfare. 15 crocodile shears. If you were guilty of treason in late medieval Europe, execution wasn't just about death. It was about making a public example. The crocodile shears were forged iron tongs with 4 or more serrated jaws, shaped like a crocodile's mouth. Heated until glowing red, they were clamped around the offender's fingers. toes, or worse. The teeth didn't just pierce. They bit deep, tearing flesh and splintering bone. The point wasn't just pain, it was spectacle. The crowd could hear the hiss of burning flesh and the victims' screams over the executioners, hammering blows. 14 strappado. If medieval torture had a sound, it would be the sickening crack of tearing ligaments from the strappado. The victims' hands were tied behind their back. A rope was looped around the wrists and hoisted over a high beam. With one sudden drop, the full body weight wrenched the shoulders out of their sockets, often on the first pull. The pain was so intense it could cause permanent paralysis or death from shock. In Florence's Piazza della Signoria, it became a public stage for hoistings, the crowd watching bones snap while the accused screamed confessions. 13. The Branks. If you thought medieval punishment was all blood and broken bones, think again. The Branks, or Scold's Bridle, proved psychological torture could be just as devastating. Emerging in 16th century Scotland, it targeted women accused of gossip or nagging. The device was an iron cage fitted over the head with a flat plate forced into the mouth, sometimes with spikes to tear the tongue if she tried to speak. Women were paraded through town while crowds jeered and threw filth. It left no fatal wounds, but the emotional and physical scars could last a lifetime. 12. The Garrote. The garrote was execution by slow strangulation, but with a brutal twist. The victim was seated, and an iron collar was locked around their neck. A screw or lever at the back was turned slowly, pressing a metal bolt into the spine or throat. Early versions caused slow asphyxiation. Later models added a sharpened point that crushed the cervical vertebrae instantly. The psychological horror was profound. The victim sat calmly, feeling the cold iron, knowing the next twist could either choke them slowly or break their neck in one snap. 11. The pillory and stocks. The pillory and stocks weren't just public shaming devices. They were slow-motion torture machines. A condemned person, locked in place for hours or days, became a living target. Crowds hurled rotten food, dung, stones, and even boiling liquids. In 1623 London, a man accused of fraud died in the pillory after a stone crushed his skull. Survival depended not on the sentence, but on the mood of the mob. 10. The coffin torture. The coffin torture was exactly what it sounded like. An iron cage shaped to fit a human body, sometimes barely larger than the victim. Used across medieval Europe, the condemned were stripped naked, locked inside and hung in public squares. They were left to starve, dehydrate, or freeze. In more sadistic cases, executioners smeared them with honey to attract insects. The sight of the corpse, ribs protruding and flesh rotting, was meant to stick in the minds of anyone considering the same crime. 9. The knee splitter. The knee splitter wasn't a subtle device. Picture two opposing metal plates, each lined with spikes, clamped around the knee and screwed tighter until the joint shattered. It wasn't meant to kill outright. It was designed to destroy the body's ability to move. Victims were often left permanently lame, crawling rather than walking. No battlefield injury was this precise. This was targeted destruction, ensuring agony lasted a lifetime. 8. Tarring and feathering. If burning at the stake was hellfire, tarring and feathering was hellfire with glue. Used on pirates and mutineers as a warning, the victim was stripped and lashed to a post. Boiling tar, heated to over 200 degrees, was poured or brushed directly onto the skin. The tar bonded to flesh, sealing in heat and causing deep blackened blisters. Finally, the victim was set alight, turned into a human torch. This was a sentence designed for horror as much as death. 7. Thumb screws. Forget grand executions. Thumb screws were torture condensed into the size of a book clasp. This small iron device clamped over the fingers or thumbs and was tightened by a screw. Each twist drove the metal deeper, crushing bone, bursting nails, and tearing skin. A skilled torturer could prolong the ordeal for hours, using just enough pressure to maim without killing. Prison records from 1620s. Germany mentioned thieves begging for the gallows instead of another round. 6. The chair of nails. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary wooden chair until You saw the hundreds of iron spikes, covering every surface. Victims were stripped and strapped down, their own body weight driving the spikes into flesh. The spikes were often heated red-hot first, turning the torture into a combination of impalement and burning. Tight leather straps ensured you couldn't shift to relieve pressure. Every twitch drove the points deeper. This wasn't just a chair, it was a throne of agony. 5. The iron gag. The iron gag was a punishment designed to make breathing itself unbearable. It was a metal clamp forced deep into the mouth, pressing the tongue down, while a sharpened edge dug into the roof of the mouth. Victims were locked in place with iron straps around the head. Every movement of the jaw or attempt to breathe scraped tender flesh. The iron gag silenced more than words. It crushed the will. 4. The drunkard's cloak. In 17th century England, public drunkenness was shamed into memory. The drunkard's cloak was literally a beer barrel with holes cut for the head and arms. Offenders were shoved inside and marched through town while children threw mud and stones. In winter, the damp wood froze against skin, causing frostbite. What began as a comedic punishment could end in dehydration or even death. It was humiliation weaponized. 3. The Spanish tickler. This wasn't a farm tool. It was a murder weapon disguised as one. The Spanish tickler, also called the cat's claw, looked like an iron rake with curved prongs. Victims were chained to walls, and the claw was raked across bare skin, shredding muscle and tendons. Often the claws were heated until glowing red, searing flesh as they tore it away. The Spanish tickler was about unmaking a person, piece by piece, in front of an audience. 2. The breaking wheel. Also called the Catherine wheel, this method wasn't just about killing. It was about destroying the human body in front of a crowd. Victims were tied to a massive wooden wheel, limbs spread. The executioner used an iron cudgel to smash bones, starting from the legs and working upward. Sometimes the victim was left alive, their broken body woven through the wheel's spokes and hoisted high on a pole for all to see. This was public theater of pain, meant to echo in memory for decades. 1. Scaphism. If hell had a waiting room, it would be scaphism. This method trapped the victim between two hollowed-out boats or planks, with only the head, hands, and feet exposed. Executioners force-fed them milk and honey until violent diarrhea set in, then smeared the exposed skin with more honey to lure insects. Bound helplessly, the victim floated on a stagnant pond. Flies, wasps, and ants swarmed the body, laying eggs in open sores. Death could take over a week as flesh rotted alive. It wasn't just execution, it was erasure. Thanks for braving history's darkest corners. If you want more shocking true stories from the past, be sure to like, subscribe, and watch our next video. Because the Middle Ages were just the beginning of human cruelty.